My family betrayed me on my wedding day. Hi, I'm Clara. And that morning, my mom texted, "Don't expect anyone to show up." That night, I saw their smiling group photo without me. Would you forgive that? Tell me in the comments what you would do if this was your wedding. On the morning of my wedding, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing on the nightstand next to the vase of wildflowers someone from Evan's family had dropped off. I had just sat down in the little wooden chair by the window while the makeup artist dabbed powder along my jaw when I glanced at the screen. For a second, the sunlight through the window washed it out, like even the phone wanted to spare me. Then the words came into focus. "Don't expect anyone to show. We've made our choice." My mother's name at the top. Short, flat, no emojis. I held my breath the way you do when something falls and you can't stop it. The makeup brush froze an inch from my cheek. Behind us, someone laughed out on the deck where Evan's cousins were stringing up fairy lights. It sounded far away, like a different planet. The makeup artist noticed. "You okay?" she asked softly, but I just nodded and set the phone down. My hand left a faint powder mark on the glass. I stared at that text until the letters blurred. Somewhere inside me, a thin thread snapped with a sound only I could hear. It had been a warm July morning, the kind that smelled like pine and fresh-cut grass. Beyond the cabin window, the Bridger Mountains looked painted, too calm to hold what was happening in my chest. I told myself maybe they'd changed their mind, that maybe there was still a car pulling into the gravel lot. Hope is stubborn that way, even when it's been told no 100 times. The red scarf was in my bag. I'd packed it out of habit, like a secret talisman even though the sun made the boards on the deck hot to the touch. Grandma knit it for me the winter before she passed, and sometimes just knowing it was near helped. I almost pulled it out just to hold something familiar, but I stopped. I didn't want it to smell like hairspray. By noon, the deck was buzzing. Friends adjusted chairs, a string band tuned in the shade, and the smell of barbecue floated from the smoker where Evan's uncle tended ribs like it was the most serious job in the world. A childhood friend, Emma, came to the cabin to tell me it was time. She offered me her arm without a word. She knew. We'd been 10 years old the first time she saw how my parents looked at me like I was extra luggage, and she'd been watching ever since. The aisle was a path of wildflowers between rows of wooden chairs. The late afternoon sun slid between clouds, laying patches of gold on the grass. Evan was waiting under a wooden arch, simple and steady, his tie a little crooked. I clung to Emma's arm, and when I lifted my head, I saw the empty row. It was impossible to miss. 8 chairs, perfectly straight, like soldiers on leave. No coats, no purses, just silence in physical form. I walked slower than I thought I would, like each step might shake something loose inside me. Evan smiled when I reached him, the kind of smile that said he'd carry it if I couldn't. The officiant began, her voice low and warm, and the mountains stood behind her like patient witnesses. During the vows, my voice wobbled once. I saw a sparrow hop along the edge of the deck and thought, absurdly, that even the birds had shown up. I looked at Evan and remembered why I was here. Why I had chosen to stop begging for love I had to earn. I promised out loud what I had whispered to myself all these months, to choose what was steady over what was loud, what was real over what only looked like family. When he said "I do," it came out like he'd been waiting his whole life to say it. People clapped, a cheer rose, and for a second the air smelled like lilacs and cedar and everything good. But even as I smiled, there was a hollow place just over my left shoulder where my family should have been. The reception spilled across the lawn. Paper lanterns swayed. Kids darted between tables. Someone passed me a plate piled with corn on the cob, coleslaw, ribs dripping with sauce. I took a bite of cornbread and barely tasted it. Evan's aunt asked me to dance. We swayed to the sound of a guitar and a fiddle. The sunset turned the fields around us orange and rose, and laughter bubbled around the tables like soda fizz. My phone stayed silent in my purse. Every few minutes, my eyes slid toward it anyway. I caught Evan looking at me. He came over, wiped a smudge of sauce from my wrist with a napkin, and whispered, "You don't have to keep checking." I nodded, but I didn't stop. Hope is a habit you can't break in one afternoon. Later, when the cake was cut and the music slowed, guests left with paper boxes full of leftover barbecue. I hugged people, smiled for pictures, waved until the taillights disappeared down the gravel drive. Then the quiet came. The lights in the trees hummed softly as the crew stacked chairs. My gown was streaked with grass at the hem, and my makeup had given up hours ago. I slipped away to the bridal suite and closed the door. My phone lit up as I set it on the desk. Not a message, not even a missed call, just the screen waking. Out of habit, I opened Instagram, and there it was. A photo posted less than an hour ago. My parents, my sister, my cousins, everyone. They were on the porch at my parents' house, glasses raised, smiling at the camera. Same day, same time. Their faces easy, like I didn't exist, like this day wasn't happening. The room tilted. The towel from my morning shower was still on the rack, soft and dry. I grabbed it, pressed it to my face, and sank to the floor. My breath came in ragged little pulls. I tried to be quiet, habit again, but the tears soaked through anyway. Outside the door, I could hear Evan thanking the last of the band as they packed up. I heard the faint crunch of gravel under someone's boots. I stayed there, folded over myself, and for a moment I let the loss feel as wide as it really was. No excuses, no more pretending that if I just worked harder, they'd choose me. It's strange how a single picture can take the place of a whole conversation. They'd made their choice, and the photo made sure I understood. Sometime near midnight, I wiped my face, rinsed it in the sink, and brushed my hair back. In the mirror, my eyes looked red and tired, but there was something steady there, too. I pulled the red scarf from my bag and draped it over my wrist, even though the night was still warm. The fabric smelled faintly like cedar from the drawer at home, a reminder that love, when it's real, never asks you to beg. I lay down, the scarf in my hands, and stared at the ceiling until the dark blurred. That night, I learned a truth. Love in my family had conditions, and I no longer met them. A year can pass quietly if you let it. That winter night, I thought I had finally learned how. The snow had been falling since late afternoon, covering the street outside my small townhouse in Bozeman like a clean sheet pulled over a restless body. I had a pot of potato soup simmering on the stove, the rosemary just starting to soften its sharpness into something gentle, and the puzzle on the dining table was waiting for me like a friend. I was humming without realizing it, sleeves rolled up, chamomile tea cooling by my elbow. For the first time in months, there was no weight on my chest, just the sound of the heater kicking on and the faint rattle of wind against the windows. Then my phone buzzed, a little hum across the counter. At first, I didn't move. These days, calls were almost always about work, and most texts were from Evan's side of the family asking when we were coming by. The pot bubbled softly, and I reached for my mug, deciding to check later. Buzz again, and then it stopped. By the time I wiped my hands and crossed the kitchen, the screen had already gone dark. One missed call, one voicemail. The number was Arya's. I pressed play. "Aunt Clara?" The sound of wind roared behind her voice like the sea. "Please, they threw us out. It's snowing so hard. Mom, they said she's a disgrace. We're outside. I don't know what to do." The rest was static. I stood frozen, the ladle still in my hand. It wasn't fear that came first. It was disbelief. The kind that knocks the air out of you because you don't want to believe what you just heard. My mouth tasted like metal. I pressed redial with shaking fingers. No answer. Tried again, straight to voicemail. For a moment, I could see the empty chairs at my wedding as clearly as if they were in the kitchen with me. All 8 of them, perfectly straight, no coats, no purses. That same hollowness was now in Arya's voice. I hung up and heard my own breath, fast and sharp. Then something inside me, quieter than panic, older than anger, said, "Move." I yanked the pot off the stove and dropped the ladle into the sink, the handle clattering against porcelain. The air was thick with rosemary and fear. I pulled my coat from the hook, stuffed the thermos with hot tea, grabbed 2 heavy blankets from the closet. At the back of the same closet, I saw it, the red scarf. It had sat there all year, folded and waiting, like it knew there would come a time when I couldn't hide from family anymore. I wound it once around my neck, then again, tucking the ends close. This time, it wasn't just a talisman. It was armor. Outside, the cold slapped the heat out of my skin. Snow bit at my cheeks as I pulled the door shut and started the car. It groaned like an old animal. Frost crawled across the windshield faster than the defroster could clear. "Okay," I whispered, more to myself than anything. "Hold on, Issa, hold on." 9 hours, the GPS said. 9 hours through a Minnesota blizzard. My tires crunched over the ice as I steered toward the interstate, wipers squeaking against glass. The snow wasn't just falling, it was attacking. Sheets of white blurred the world into a narrow tunnel of headlights. Every few minutes, I leaned forward to see 10 feet ahead. The heater whirred, the fan on high, but my hands stayed cold. Somewhere past Big Timber, the weather alert interrupted the radio, a flat voice telling travelers to stay home if they could. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "I can't," I said out loud, the words fogging the cabin. The miles stretched. My world narrowed to the yellow lines barely visible under the snow and the steady rhythm of the wipers. I thought about Arya's little voice and how scared she must have been to call me, the aunt she hadn't seen since the wedding. I thought about Isla too, stubborn and loud, how our parents must have hated that about her. As I drove, memories rose uninvited. The time she spun in circles wearing Mom's shoes, the time she insisted I join her on the porch during thunderstorms because the lightning can't get you if you're dancing. She had always been lightning, bright and reckless, but that night the storm had turned against her. Around midnight, the snow grew thicker. Near Duluth, a semi came out of nowhere, its trailer fishtailing across my lane. My hands jerked the wheel so hard my wrist popped. For one frozen second, all I could see was a wall of white and red taillights swinging toward me. I swerved, tires shrieking, the car sliding toward the guardrail. It stopped just short. My chest slammed against the seatbelt. Everything went silent except for my own heart pounding in my ears. I sat there with my forehead pressed to the steering wheel, breathing like I had run for miles. I could smell hot rubber, faintly, and the metallic taste of fear at the back of my throat. After a long minute, I forced myself to look up. The semi had disappeared into the curtain of snow like it had never been there. "I'm coming," I whispered, voice shaking. "Isa, hold on, please." I straightened, hands trembling, and pulled back onto the road. The scarf around my neck felt damp from my breath, but warm, steady. Outside, the wind clawed at the car, but inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a year: certainty. The road ahead was nothing but white, but for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I was going. The driveway looked longer than I remembered. Maybe it was the snow swallowing every edge of the gravel, or maybe it was the weight pressing on my chest. But those last 100 yards felt like miles. My headlights cut narrow tunnels through the white, beams catching only swirls of flurries before disappearing again. Somewhere out there in that whiteout was the house where I had once practiced spelling words on the porch swing, where I had once believed a knock on the door meant love. When the farmhouse finally came into view, it was exactly as I remembered. White paint now dulled to gray, the porch rail crooked to the left, the same porch light burning like nothing had changed, but the welcome was colder than the snow. I eased the car into park, the tires sinking deep. The engine ticked when I turned it off, the sound sharp against the wind's howl. For a moment, I just sat there, staring through the windshield at the front steps, my hands clenched around the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The last time I stood on that porch, I was 10. It was after a school play. I had waited 2 hours in the rain for someone to pick me up, only to end up walking home soaked through. I can still feel the splinters of that rail under my palms as I stood there knocking on the locked door, wondering why no one came sooner. Tonight, the same wood waited for me. I opened the door and stepped out into snow that swallowed my boots. The cold knifed into my lungs so fast I gasped. It took only a few steps before I saw the shape at the bottom of the porch stairs. At first, it was just a heap of frozen fabric, like someone had left an old quilt outside. But then the beam of my headlights caught the smallest thing, a tiny hand, stiff and pale, sticking out. My heart stopped. "Isla?" I dropped to my knees, the snow biting at my skin through the jeans. Up close, I could see them. Isla curled on her side, arms wrapped tight around Arya, who clung to her chest, and little Lila tucked between them like a fragile seed. "Arya, baby, it's Aunt Clara," I whispered, pulling a blanket from my arm and draping it over her small body. Her lips were cracked, her eyes half closed. Lila didn't even cry, just shallow, rattling breaths that made my own lungs ache. I pressed my fingers to Isla's neck. For 1 second there was nothing, and then, faint, a weak, stubborn pulse. "It's okay," I said, though my voice cracked. "I've got you." I wrapped the blankets around the girls, tucking them in close. My hands were clumsy, all mitten and shaking. Then I pulled off my own scarf, the red one that had traveled all these miles, and wrapped it around Lila's small chest, tying it snug beneath her chin. The wool was damp with my breath, but warm. When I looked up, something moved behind the curtain. A shadow. Someone was standing there, watching. I stood, snowflakes stinging my face, and shouted, "Help me! She's freezing out here, please!" The curtain twitched once more. A moment later, the front door opened with a creak. Warm yellow light spilled out, almost mocking against the dark. And there she was, my mother in her robe, holding a steaming mug of tea like she was stepping into another Sunday morning. Her expression was as blank as the snow-covered fields around us. "If you take her," she said, voice calm, "you're on your own. We're done with this drama." I stared up at her, wind cutting tears out of my eyes. "Drama? She's unconscious. Your grandkids are freezing." She didn't even glance at the girls. She made her choices. Divorce has consequences. My mouth opened and shut. The words that came out weren't loud, just flat. "You'd rather let them die on your porch than admit you're wrong." Behind her, I heard a rustle. Then my father's voice, sharp and familiar. "She made her bed. Now she can lie in it." I swallowed hard. I could feel something inside me, that old, small 10-year-old girl, begging me to say the right words, to change their minds. But another part of me, older, tired, knew better. I knelt, lifted Isla into my arms. She was lighter than I remembered, her body all bone and cold, like the storm had hollowed her out. Her head lolled against my shoulder. "Arya," I said softly, "hold on to my coat, okay? We're going to the car." The 8-year-old nodded weakly, eyes fixed on me, and reached for my sleeve. Lila whimpered once, tiny hands clutching the scarf. I didn't look back at the porch. The snow came up to my knees, every step a battle, but I kept walking. Past the mailbox that had always leaned too far to one side, past the tire tracks of my car already half buried again. As I opened the back door, I heard the front door slam shut behind me. No apology, no footsteps following, just the wind. I eased Isla into the back seat, tucking the blankets close around her. Arya crawled in after her, curling up like she'd learned how to be small even in sleep. I strapped Lila into the booster I had pulled out of storage months ago, back when I thought maybe someday they'd visit. When I shut the door, the car felt like a tiny island of heat. I sat in the driver's seat, my breath coming out in clouds, and glanced in the rearview mirror. Arya's eyes met mine, wide and wet. She whispered, "You came." I reached back and squeezed her hand. Of course I did. Outside, the porch light flickered once in the storm. Inside, I turned the key, the engine growling back to life. And just like on my wedding day, I knew I was on my own. Only this time, I wasn't leaving without them. The warmth of the hospital hit me like a wall. It was sudden and thick, almost suffocating after 9 hours of snow and wind, but it couldn't melt the image of that porch. I still saw the frozen wood under my sister's body, the white of her lips, the way little Lila's fingers had curled around my scarf as though it was the last thing keeping her tethered. "Right through here," a nurse said, brisk but kind, and the sliding doors shut behind us. The snow outside blurred into a white sheet of glass. Hands reached for Isla and the girls as soon as we stepped into the emergency entrance. Warm blankets were pulled from a silver warmer, thermometers beeped, voices moved around me, all fast and certain. I followed them as far as they let me, then stopped at a door where a nurse with kind eyes and a mask said softly, "You did the right thing bringing them in. We'll take care of them now." Her words almost undid me. My hands, raw from the steering wheel and the cold, trembled as I hugged the red scarf close to my chest. The waiting room was quiet, almost hollow. Plastic chairs lined up in rows like soldiers. The faint hum of a coffee machine filled the space with a low vibration. Somewhere, a TV murmured a news anchor's voice about road closures, but I couldn't focus on the words. Snow tapped against the wide front windows, soft and relentless like fingers drumming on glass. I sat. For a long while, I couldn't tell whether my legs were still shaking from the drive or from the fear that if I moved, someone would say I'd done something wrong. Time stretched thin. Nurses came and went. A woman with a toddler balanced on her hip paced back and forth across the tile. And still I sat, my scarf balled up in my lap, the edges frayed, smelling faintly of frost and baby's breath. I thought I'd feel relief. That had been the goal of the whole drive, right? Get them somewhere safe. Get them warm. Instead, all I could do was stare at the door they'd disappeared behind, waiting for someone to tell me how much damage the cold had done to their small bodies, and whether the guilt of leaving them behind all those years had cost us everything. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I thought about calling Evan. I thought about how his voice might ground me, but before I could pull the phone free, a voice said my name. "Clara Morgan?" I looked up. A woman stood in front of me, holding a thin folder. She wore a navy cardigan, her hair neatly pinned back. She looked like someone who might work in a library, the kind of face you'd trust if you didn't know better. "Yes," I said, standing instinctively. She offered a polite, practiced smile. "I'm with Child and Family Services. We need to speak with you about tonight." My stomach dropped. "About tonight?" She nodded, her tone gentle. "We received a report earlier from your parents. They say you removed 2 minor children from their property without consent." The words hung in the sterile air, heavier than anything the storm had thrown at me. What? "We just need to clarify what happened," she continued. "Would you mind coming with me to a quiet room? It won't take long." For a moment, all I could do was stare at her. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed, and the sound of someone laughing softly echoed in the distance. It felt like a different world, one where none of this was happening. "They called you?" I finally asked. My voice sounded far away. "They reported a possible kidnapping," she said carefully. "We have to review custody arrangements before anyone can leave the hospital with the children." The scarf in my hands twisted so tightly that the knit dug into my palms. "I found them unconscious in the snow," I whispered. "Do you understand that? My sister could have died. The baby, she was blue. You want me to explain why I didn't leave them there?" "I do understand," she said, though her voice was steady in a way that made it clear understanding wasn't the point. "But we still have to follow procedure." Something inside me sagged. The warmth that had felt like safety a few minutes ago now pressed in like another kind of wall, just like the locked doors on my wedding day. I nodded once, barely. "Fine." She gestured toward a small consultation room off the waiting area. Inside, the walls were pale beige and the chairs softer, but it still smelled faintly of antiseptic. She sat across from me and opened her folder, flipping to a form. "Can you confirm your relationship to the children?" "I'm their aunt," I said, each word clipped. "And their mother's condition right now?" "She's in there, sedated, unconscious when I found her." She wrote something down, her pen scratching quietly. "And to clarify, you don't have legal guardianship of the girls?" I exhaled sharply. "No, because their mother was alive until your report nearly cost her that." Her eyes softened, just a fraction. "I know this is difficult. These steps aren't a judgment. They're meant to ensure the children's safety." I stared at her, wondering if she had ever driven through a whiteout with hands so numb they could barely turn the wheel, if she had ever watched a toddler's chest barely move from the cold and thought, if I stop now, she might not take another breath. "I need to make a call," I said finally. She nodded, leaving me alone in the room. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers. There was only one name that made sense. "Alyssa," I whispered when she answered. She didn't ask why I was calling so late. "What happened?" "They're trying to take them," I said. "I got to the house. Issa was on the porch, frozen, and I brought them here. Now a social worker says there's a report. They're calling it kidnapping." "Clara, listen to me," she said, calm but quick. "Don't sign anything tonight. Just keep telling the truth. I'll file notice in the morning, but you need to cooperate until I get there. Can you do that?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, I can't lose them, Alyssa." "You won't. This is what I do, remember?" Her voice steadied something in me. When I hung up, the quiet of the consultation room settled again, heavy but less empty. The social worker came back in, her face unreadable. "For now, you can stay here until we confirm the family's condition. No one leaves with the children tonight." I sat back, my scarf still clutched in both hands. Through the window behind her, I could see that the snow had stopped. The storm outside had quieted, but the one inside was just beginning. By the next spring, the snow had melted, but the cold in my family never thawed. Helena was warming up for the year, patches of yellow grass pushing through the last thin crusts of ice, the river running high with melted snow. But as I walked up the courthouse steps that morning, all I felt was winter. The courthouse smelled like old wood and strong coffee, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes. Rows of polished benches stretched out in the hearing room, already filled with faces I half recognized. Neighbors, old friends, even a few reporters. People whispered, and though they tried to be discreet, I could feel the weight of every look. I kept my eyes straight ahead. Isla sat beside me, a pale scarf wound around her neck, still thinner than she used to be. Alyssa was on my other side, her bag full of files and her voice steady as ever. "Just breathe," she murmured without looking at me. I nodded, even though my hands were cold. Across the room, my parents sat shoulder to shoulder. My mother wore lavender again, the exact same shade she had worn at my wedding when she didn't show up but posed for a family photo without me. My father's silver tie gleamed under the lights. They didn't look at me, not yet. The bailiff called the room to order. The opposing attorney, a man in a dark suit with a voice like a cold blade, stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here to correct a dangerous situation. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, are seeking guardianship of their grandchildren due to the instability and questionable judgment of their daughter, Clara Morgan Sloan, and her sister, Isla Morgan." He spoke as if rehearsing for a play. "They were abandoned in a storm," he said. "Instead of bringing them back to safety, Clara removed them from family property without consent. We have documented evidence of erratic behavior, and most importantly," he paused for effect, turning toward our table, "we have a signed waiver, Ms. Sloan's own words, relinquishing guardianship responsibilities." I stiffened. "What?" I whispered to Alyssa. He held it up, a piece of paper in a protective sleeve, and for the first time my own handwriting stared back at me, only it wasn't mine. I hadn't signed it. "This," he said, "is proof that she is unfit and has already acknowledged that." The judge leaned forward. "You will submit that document into evidence. Ms. Sloan, do you contest it?" Alyssa stood, her tone calm. "Yes, Your Honor. My client never signed that. We will provide evidence that it is a forgery." I stared down at my hands, the way the knuckles had gone white. The attorney sat, looking satisfied, as though the paper had already done its job. Then Alyssa began. "Your Honor, my clients, Clara and Isla, are not the ones who abandoned children in a snowstorm. That choice came from Mr. and Mrs. Morgan. We intend to show that tonight was not a rescue gone wrong. It was a rescue made necessary by neglect." She called the first witness, the notary. A middle-aged woman in a beige coat and glasses walked to the stand. She raised her right hand, took the oath, and sat. Alyssa stepped forward with a single sheet of paper. "Ms. Langford," she began, "is this your stamp on this waiver?" The woman adjusted her glasses and leaned in. "Yes, that is my stamp, but I've never seen this young woman before today." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. "Just to be clear," Alyssa said, "you did not witness her signature?" "No," the notary replied firmly. "Someone used my stamp without my consent." My parents stiffened at their table. My mother's smile slipped. The attorney tried to recover. "Objection!" "Overruled," said the judge. I felt a tiny piece of air return to my lungs. Alyssa glanced at me, a quick flicker of reassurance, and then called the second witness. "Hank Peterson," she said. The room stirred. My parents turned sharply as a tall man with a sun-weathered face and wide shoulders stood from the back bench. Hank lived on the property adjacent to the farm. He had been my dad's friend for as long as I could remember. The bailiff swore him in. "Hank," Alyssa asked, "can you tell us where you were on the night of December 29th, 2021? "I was out in my truck," Hank said, voice rough from years of wind and dust. "The storm was bad, couldn't see much. I was trying to make sure my livestock were all in." "And what did you see when you passed the Morgan farmhouse?" He looked over at my parents before answering. "I saw Clara," he said. "She was dragging her sister and those babies through the snow, trying to get them into her car. Nobody came out to help her." My mother's hand gripped the edge of the table. "And to be clear," Alyssa said, "you saw no effort by Mr. or Mrs. Morgan to assist?" "No," he said. "I saw them watching through the window." The judge scribbled a note. The opposing attorney tried to shake him. "You couldn't possibly know," Hank interrupted steady. "I was close enough to see Clara's face, and I heard Mrs. Morgan say, 'If you take her, you're on your own.' That's what made me stop." A hush fell over the room. Alyssa stepped back. "No further questions." When Hank left the stand, the judge leaned forward. "I have heard enough." He turned to the other table. "This waiver is invalid. It was obtained improperly. Furthermore, based on testimony and the evidence presented, custody remains with Isla Sloan. The emergency petition by Mr. and Mrs. Morgan is denied. A restraining order will be placed to ensure no further interference with these children's welfare." The gavel came down. For a moment, there was only silence, and then a ripple of clapping from the gallery. It wasn't loud, just a soft wave of sound, but I stayed still. I couldn't bring myself to clap for my own freedom. Isla reached over and squeezed my hand. Across the aisle, my parents sat frozen, as though the very world had slipped out from under them. My father's jaw worked, but no words came. And I sat there looking at the wooden table, the grain of it running smooth under my fingertips. Because winning in court doesn't fix the hole they left behind. 4 years after my wedding, I stopped looking for them in every crowd. Spring came early to Bozeman this year. The mountains still wore white caps, but down here, green had started to push its way through, bright and stubborn. Through the open kitchen window, the smell of thawed earth mingled with the soft scent of fresh bread cooling on the counter. The red scarf hangs in a shadow box now, just above the table where we eat breakfast every morning. The glass catches the sunlight and makes the fabric glow, a square of quiet fire. Beneath it, I framed a small card in my own handwriting. You don't owe anyone your silence. Arya sat at the table, swinging her legs as she peeled at an orange I'd started for her. She was 10 now, long hair tucked behind one ear, freckles across her nose from running in the sun, even though it was only April. Lila sat across from her with a cereal spoon in both hands, as if the spoon itself might run away if she wasn't careful. Isla poured milk into a second bowl, wearing one of my old sweatshirts. Her hair, which had been brittle and falling out 2 years ago, had grown thick again. She tied it back with a band that had a little daisy on it. Behind us, Evan was folding a pile of laundry. He hummed under his breath as he worked, no tune in particular. His quiet has always been different from the silence I grew up with. His quiet is steady, a place you can lean on. I took my time peeling each segment of the orange, separating them like little suns. Arya looked up at me. We're going to the park after breakfast, right? Yes, I said. As soon as your mom finishes her cereal and Uncle Evan tames that pile of socks. Evan chuckled softly without looking up. Lila grinned, cheeks full of milk and cereal. Socks are monsters, she declared, which made Isla laugh for the first time that morning. The park was only a short walk away. By the time we reached the playground, the air was warm enough that Lila took off her little jacket and tied it around her waist. Kids were everywhere, their voices carrying on the breeze like bird song. I found a bench that faced the open field where dandelions had already started to bloom. Arya and Lila darted off, their shoes leaving trails in the soft earth. Isla sat next to me, pushing her sunglasses up onto her head. For a while, we didn't talk. We just watched them. You know, Isla said finally, sometimes I wonder if they ever regret it. Mom and Dad. Her voice was quiet, almost careful. I didn't answer right away. I followed Arya with my eyes as she bent down and gathered a handful of flowers. I think, I said slowly, they regret losing control, not losing us. Isla let out a breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That sounds about right. I turned to look at her. The lines of exhaustion around her mouth had softened this past year. It made her look more like the sister I grew up with. They chose that, I said, and we chose this. This, she echoed, and her gaze followed mine, out to where the girls were spinning in circles, Lila's curls flying like a halo. Arya came running back to us, her hands full of a crooked bouquet of dandelions and wild grass. For you, Aunt Clara, she said, handing it over with a proud grin. I took it with both hands, feeling the stems cool and damp against my palms. Thank you, sweet pea, I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment before racing back to the field. Lila followed, arms out like a little airplane. I looked down at the flowers in my lap. They were a little bent, a little messy, but in that moment they were more precious to me than any formal bouquet I'd ever been given. The breeze carried the smell of warm grass. As the afternoon went on, I found myself thinking about the day everything started, the morning of my wedding, when I sat alone in a makeup chair, hoping for a text that wasn't cruel. I thought about the empty chairs at the ceremony, the way I scrolled through that family photo later that night, trying to make sense of a kind of rejection that doesn't leave a mark on your skin, but still bruises you all the way through. Back then, I thought I had lost everything. But sitting here now, with sun on my arms and laughter floating around me, I realized that losing them was the first step to finding something better. Not a perfect life, not a life without struggle, but a life that belonged to me. Isla stood and stretched. We should head back soon. Lila needs a nap or we'll be dealing with the dragon version of her by dinner. I laughed, still holding the bouquet. Fair point. We walked home slowly, letting the girls skip ahead. When we reached the house, the afternoon light poured across the living room floor like honey. Evan had already put away the laundry and opened the windows to let the fresh air in. The red scarf on the wall caught that golden light, glowing against the glass. I paused in front of it, tracing the words I'd written on the card below. Isla stopped beside me. You know, she said softly, I think that scarf saved us. I smiled. I think it reminded me that we could save ourselves. We stood there for a long moment, quiet, just breathing in the smell of home. Fresh bread, a hint of detergent from the folded laundry, the faint perfume of dandelions still clutched in my hand. Behind us, the girls had already started another game, their voices bright and unstoppable. I turned back to the table and set the bouquet in a glass of water. On my wedding day, I thought I lost everything. It turns out that was the day I started building something better. As I watched the girls run through the grass, their hands full of yellow dandelions, a quiet truth settled in me like warm sunlight. We made it through. Pain leaves its marks, but love leaves a home, and sometimes you have to build that home yourself. I've learned that the family we choose can be stronger than the family we're born to. If this story reminds you of someone you stood by in a hard season, share it with me. I'd be honored to hear yours.